Well, welcome everyone. This is Rhonda Hull, and I am delighted to have with me today Wendi Knox, who is a writer, an artist, and an uplifter. In Wendi's past professional life, she was the only senior vice president and creative director of one of the largest advertising agencies in LA, creating award-winning ad campaigns and brands for Honda and Acura. But everything changed for her after she had a mystical experience with hundreds of red dragonflies. Wendi is here to tell us more about what she learned through her encounter with dragonflies and the lessons she learns that still apply to the challenges that we face today. So welcome, Wendi, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rhonda. I'm excited.
Well, you know, everybody is probably wondering about what the encounter was with dragonflies. So why don't you just start us off and tell us how that experience led you to what you're doing now?
Okay, well, a little backstory. I used to have a big fat job in an ad agency. I was the only female senior vice president creative director at this really big ad agency in LA. And it was not just a job, it was my dream for my 20s. And I worked my way all the way up from writing like labels on soup to being, you know, this big position. I was kind of like Don Draper in Mad Men. Without the martinis or the cigarettes. So it was a big job, but around in my 40s, it looked a lot better than it felt. My soul was longing to get out of there. I felt like I had some other contribution to make to the world, but I had a small child and a husband who's an entrepreneur, which I don't know if you know this, but that's French for no health plan. So we really needed my job. But at 50, I got laid off. That's what they called it. It felt more like ageism and sexism, but
yes,
whatever you call it, I found myself stuck in the muck of worry, fear, and now what? And one day I was crying in my backyard, really desperately hurting, like, what am I supposed to do now? And I said a prayer and I asked the universe, am I too old to reinvent myself? Please give me a sign. And I went for a walk with my dog, Lucky. And when we came home, I got a sign like nothing I'd ever seen in my backyard, which wasn't close to any water or ponds or anything. There were hundreds of red dragonflies whirling and swirling over our outdoor umbrella like a merry-go-round. I felt like a kid who, you know, saw a merry-go-round for the first time. It was so magical and so unusual. They didn't just stay for 4 hours the first day, but the dragonflies came back for 3 more days.
Wow. Ooh, I get chills.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I honestly, they would leave before my husband would come home from work. So I thought, God, maybe I'm hallucinating and imagining this. So I got my neighbor to come over to make sure I wasn't seeing things. And she concurred. There were dragonflies, and I just didn't know what to make of it. So I did what anyone would do. I started Googling dragonflies. And when I did, I learned something I'd never heard before, and maybe you haven't either. I learned that dragonflies spend most of their lives crawling in the muck at the bottom of the pond, and they stay down there for up to 4 years. Oh. And while they're in the muck, they keep shedding their old skin and growing new skin and go through up to 15 mutations over 4 years. Until one day,
it's even slower than a butterfly, you know?
Yeah, it's like that. But one day the dragonfly climbs out of the pond. Something leads her or him to climb out of the pond, and there in the sunlight, their wings unfurl. Oh. And they fly much later in life, which is something I never knew. And so the whole time they're stuck in the muck, they're growing their magic. And I was so moved by this because I'd asked for a sign, and I believe I was being told it's okay. We don't fly till later in life, and that magic could be awaiting you. And I started after that, I was so moved and blown away. And I thought, okay, this is a pretty amazing sign and very magical message. But I started seeing dragonflies everywhere.
Uh-huh.
I live in LA. I lived in LA. So on the 10 freeway, on the 405, on Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset Boulevard. One day I was walking to a dentist appointment in Beverly Hills, and there was another red dragonfly. And my husband and I used to come up to Ojai, which is where we live now, which is beautiful, little valley outside of LA.
Yeah.
And we were walking across a golf course to go to lunch, and there was another swarm of red dragonflies. And at that point, I said to my husband, okay, that's it. I know this is crazy, but I think those dragonflies know I have a background in branding and writing, and I think they want me to get their message out into the world. I mean, I felt like they were recruiting me for this mission, and that's exactly what I'm doing now. I'm on a mission to uplift and inspire others, that those times when we're stuck in our muck, we're actually growing our wings. And I really want the dragonfly to be something that we can all get inspiration and encouragement from.
Well, it's so, my whole message takes us from womb to tomb. And it kind of seems, just as the way you were telling the story, it seems to happen in decade markers where, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So you talked about, 20, you talked about kind of your 30s, 40s, and then at this moment in your 50s. And it was when I had just right after my 50th birthday that I almost took a dare to move here to the Northwest. And it was one of those moments where you go, all I know is I got to do this. You just know that you're receiving a sign of some kind,
Yes.
and you have to follow it. And the illusion that you and all women, well, maybe not all women, but most women in our culture buy into, that by 50 you don't have anything to share. And women have so had to reinvent themselves in order to play in a man's world. So our stress level is all ratcheted up to do it through adrenaline rather than oxytocin, which is the way women handle stress. So that's why women are so challenged with autoimmune and other things, because we handle stress in a different way men do, but we've had to adapt. So I think it's so wonderful that you have this message about reinventing yourself and knowing that it requires the muck.
Yes. And one thing I always say when I speak to groups of women is the dragonfly, one of the big lessons that they teach us is to be one with the muck. Because
Yes.
when they're in the muck, nobody knows this, but dragonflies are like eating machines. They eat something like 10 times their body weight every day.
Uh-huh.
So kind of like a Las Vegas all-you-can-eat buffet down in the muck, and they receive their nourishment there. And I believe that when we're going through our muck, which the world is like mega unfathomable muck, I believe there are nutrients and gifts to be found there, but it's not the way our culture works. The way we've been conditioned is, I'm in the muck and I better get out of it. Let's read a few self-help books, maybe do a little bit of therapy, cry a few tears, and let's get on to our next project. And I think we're all being forced right now,
Yes.
to spend time in the muck and to accept it, and if we're conscious, find the gifts here.
Yeah.
And,
it's certainly a process. And, I think many of us are being like dragonflies because we are confined to home. Everybody is visiting the refrigerator more often and eating more. We're doing that part of being the dragonfly. And I think, that's why one of the many reasons I was so eager to have this conversation with you today, is because I really do feel like we are amidst, none of us know how long this shift will happen, but we are witnessing a paradigm shift where we are in this extended period of being in the muck.
Yeah.
And it's so important to me to see through all of the experiences I've had and those that I know you've had and we'll talk more about, we resist it, but man, the muck teaches us so much. So if we can surrender and look for what is working amidst the muck,
Yeah.
rather than just getting embroiled in it, you know, to where our wings won't unfold.
Right. I always say we need to find what's right when things are going wrong, you know. So if there's all these things we can't control, getting out in nature and seeing, you know, flowers die, they rebloom, all the regenerative patterning that we can find just walking outside, you know, nightfall, the sun comes up. I mean, all those things, I believe, give us faith in signs that in the muck will be reborn eventually, you know.
And that's a really important word to make friends with.
Eventually, yes. And, you know, the thing about the dragonflies, when they're down there, they just seem to trust the process. And it's like, we're going, why am I still down here? Everybody else is flying. Why aren't I flying? You know, even now.
Dragonflies doing it better than me.
Yes, exactly. They don't have that voice in their head. And, you know, I really envy them for that. You know, especially like during this time where so many of us, whatever plans we had, we have to let go of and, you know, be in the void, be in the muck. And I've seen people come out with all these programs and wow, they got this together so quickly. What, you know, they're flying. Why aren't I? And as a creative person, you know, I learned like in my advertising career, lots of times I'd be working against a deadline and no ideas would come. And I had to learn it's okay to go for a walk or go shopping or do something else.
Right.
Take a shower. All my best ideas would come when I wasn't trying. And I feel like that surrender, that acceptance, that trust is what's necessary when you're a dragonfly or a human going through the kinds of changes that we're all going through now.
I think that word surrender is so key, and it became such a treasured word for me when I went through my near-death experience, because that's what, as soon as I surrendered, and I remember the thought that took me to surrender, that's when I had this incredible experience. And the hardest part was coming back into my body and facing this human reality again. But I think surrender is when creativity happens.
Yes.
You know, it's when you access that flow.
And you get out of your head, and I feel more into your heart. And I feel like that's what we're all being asked to do now, because our heads cannot make any sense out of anything that's going on. But I feel like even the fact that, you know, I sent out that email and I didn't know you, and somehow you got it and reached out to me. I could have tried and tried to get on podcasts and speak to women, but this just happened in the flow, in some kind of synchronicity. So I feel like that's where our lives need to go. And, you know, for me, the career I had was very in the masculine paradigm, in a hierarchy with a lot of men in charge. And I was pretty much told to keep quiet, and everything was sequential and deadlines and producing on time, on budget. And now this world I'm in, and so many of us are in, is more guided by intuition and heart and looking for openings and signs. And
yes,
it's much more magical, but it's also a roller coaster, a little scary, you know.
Because it's totally, at least in the masculine paradigm, we could lean on the illusion of security and comfort zone and predictability and cycles, you know, to
Yes.
bullish and, you know, it's like all of that. And we've entered into an awareness that I think deep in our bones as women, we know that trusting the uncertainty, that there is an unfolding that needs to happen, just like a pregnancy leads to a birth. There's
Yes.
an unfolding that needs to happen, and we just need to back off and trust the process. You know, it's like if a plant is growing, if you pull on its green leaves, it's not going to grow any faster. You just have to be with it.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about once you followed the knowing that you were to uplift dragonflies, how did that begin to unfold the direction you've taken?
Well, let me just say it was not a straight line. I had this magical epiphany and I thought, okay, now I'm going to start. I used to do a lot of presentations in my career, you know, in boardrooms and to the agency. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to start speaking and sharing this story and painting and doing all this. But then it turned out that losing my job was not the worst thing that ever happened to me. Almost losing my only child to addiction was.
Yeah.
And I felt on some level that the universe was saying, well, you want to teach people or share how to transform muck into magic? Well, we're going to give you some muck. And it was, you know, very serious and very scary.
Yeah.
But all the things that I'd learning from the dragonflies, to be one with the muck, to nourish ourselves when we're in the muck, to trust the process, that there's magic growing in what looks, you know, unimaginable. All of that was part of the process. So I thought I was going to be like going in the straight line to the speaking career and everything, but there were days when all I could do was lay on the grass and water the lawn with my tears, you know, and I had to surrender to that process. And it was interesting, while I was in that muck and trying to be as loving and compassionate to myself and nurturing in nature and all the things that I share with women now,
right,
an amazing thing happened. I got a phone call from this organization called Grief Haven that was started to support parents who had lost a child.
right.
And somebody on the board knew me and asked me to be a keynote speaker for their event. And I thought, this is so weird. Like, how am I going to uplift and inspire people there when I'm going through this with my son? And thankfully, I hadn't lost him physically, but it did feel like he'd been abducted by aliens, you know, and I just did not know how I was going to do it. And I just prayed and asked for divine guidance. And I ended up speaking, and people were so touched and so inspired. And it was like everything that I had wanted to do, but not in the way I thought it would happen and not according to my plan. It happened and it unfolded. And it was kind of like that. It was like every time I tried to make things happen, they didn't happen, but I would be invited or I'd be asked. And I also felt called to create a book. I wanted to share the story of the dragonflies with other people, but I didn't want it to just be my story. I wanted it to be in a form that other people could relate to. So I kept trying to do it and it didn't happen. And finally, again, I had to just let it go. And then one day I was sitting at my computer and these words to a poem just like flew into my brain, like from somewhere else. And it started, have you ever been stuck, so stuck in the muck with the yuck and the guck that you thought, what the muck? And it was sort of like Dr. Seuss for adults, you know. And I took intuitive painting class. I had painted years ago, but not for a very long time. And I asked the universe, where could I take an intuitive painting class? One popped up not far from where I live. And I would meditate on every line of the poem, and I would ask, how do I paint self-doubt? How do I paint fear? How do I paint the muck? And one by one, the paintings would like almost like come from somewhere beyond me.
Yes.
The book unfolded.
Chills, I'm getting chills.
Not in any order, not with an outline, and it just came. It was like a process of trust. And I ended up creating a book called From Muck to Magic, and it's a
book.
Yeah, I'll hold up the book.
Yes.
It's like it's a storybook to help us change the stories we tell ourselves. So
Yes.
this is the title, From Muck to Magic,
Oh.
An Uplifting Journey by Wendi Knox. And I put those little rhinestones on the dragonfly so it would feel kind of like the magical, mystical experience I had. And on the title page, it says that it was written, illustrated, and lived by me.
That's so good.
And it's been interesting because when I created it, it was, you know, to uplift and inspire other women who were going through changes and reinvention, like we talked about, and maybe a divorce, a big birthday, you know, just life. But now it seems so relevant for what we're going through. It's
yes.
uncanny, you know.
And to me, you know, when you birthed this book, you thought of it as a gift for this, but you're only now realizing that it's a gift for this. You know, I shared with you, I think, this story that how I had published my book back, Drive Yourself Happy, back on the heels of 9/11. And at that point, I didn't have the courage to lean into it. You know, it's where I thought, here I can't promote my book because we can't fly in an airplane, and the whole nation had descended into fear similar to what we are now. And I felt like, how can I possibly speak, teach, write about happiness when everyone is feeling such pain? And so instead of leaning into it, I leaned back. And I feel like now that following all of the little signs, it's like even in reaching out to you, it was that journey of getting your email, thinking, oh, that's the next, just knowing that that was the next step to take, not because it made linear logical sense, but because somehow that lengthy 16-inch journey between our head and our hearts, I'm choosing to trust my heart more. So here we are now thrown into another pandemic where instead of going outward, we're really supposed to go inward. We're being called to reflect inward rather than look for a solution outward.
Yes.
And it's at a time where, for me, we have feared death. And what would life be like if we viewed death as the reminder to live every moment fully of our life? And so when you have a child with an addiction, or when you're facing a child with cancer or your own diagnosis, it gives you the opportunity to trust that somehow a meaning eventually will be revealed. And so I was so excited about how your work and my work just, the perfection is like I couldn't have struggled and searched for you. It had to happen the way that it did.
I love that. I love that. Well, you know, one of the lessons when I speak to women, one of the dragonflying lessons I share is to find your fetch. a fetch is the dragonfly equivalent of a gaggle of geese or pride of lion. It's what you call a gathering of dragonflies, which nobody knows. But I always feel that the more we love and honor ourselves, the more we find others who love and honor us. Like, we are such a mirror. So the fact that you and I are on the same wavelength at a time when we're both have made decisions to listen to our heart and follow our intuition,
Yes.
it's so perfect, you know?
Well, to me, it's really what this paradigm shift is. That, you know, it was the Dalai Lama who said that the women of the Western world will be the ones who save the world. Who it's a heavy duty responsibility. We each do it in our own small way.
Yes.
But I feel like we are moving. We're watching, we're witnessing, we're feeling the stress created by the breaking down of the paradigm of competition, and we're moving into that collaborative conversation, greater respect, and the more we focus on that,
Yes.
or it allows the crumbling of the old paradigm so that we can shift rather than allowing fear to hold women back any longer. And it's not just gender, you know, it's a feminine energy. It's not a throwing away of the masculine, because that's important as well. But just like our head and our heart,
Yes.
both, it's about the blending and the merging of those. So it's just so fun to have found a playmate, you know. I know that your life, it's not like you get through the muck and then you don't spend time in the muck again.
Oh yeah.
And I know you're on the continuing journey of trying to learn most what the situation with your son's addiction is calling, who it's calling you to be. And you've been faced with yet another challenge lately. So do you want to tell a little bit about that?
Sure. So yeah, my son had right when I was on a big, not big, but for me it was big, my book tour in San Francisco. I found out my son had relapsed, and then fortunately he's doing much better now, and there's some magic that's been growing in his muck, and I'm very, very grateful. But then my husband, who has amazing energy and just seems so healthy, we'd been doing some kind of just blood tests and monitoring, because he had a kidney infection a couple of years ago, and just kind of got us checking blood, checking this. Anyway, we found out that he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. We were just shocked. That's a very slow growing blood disease that affects the bones. And it just seemed inconceivable. And I remember when the doctor told us this, it was like, I felt like the technicolor picture of my life, our lives, just faded to gray, you know, in that moment. And we had to do a x-ray to see if his bones, how far it had developed. And the doctor said, this doctor we were seeing in Ventura said, there were a couple lesions in his bones, which meant it had damaged the bones, which meant it had progressed, which meant this doctor said we had to do chemo right away, and then a bone marrow transplant, which was just horrifying, to go from 0 to, you know, 80. And it just was so hard to believe. And we had always said, if this did turn out to be something, we would get a second opinion, of course. But this doctor just seemed so sure that that's what we had to do. Well, I went home, and my husband is I think he was a Zen master in a past life. He just said, let's just take this one thing at a time. Let's just see what unfolds. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. And of course, I said, okay. And while I was around him, I was, you know, tried to keep it together, but left to my own devices. When I got home, I was like crying in the garden, crying in the bathroom, crying on the phone when he wasn't around with friends, and just letting myself be one with the muck. And then I started praying. So I was dealing with the muck and opening myself to the magic at the same time. And I'm a big one to ask. You know, I asked for a sign with the dragonflies. I got one. So I started praying and I asked for magic and miracles, even though my brain said, that is so illogical, Wendi. Your husband has cancer. What magic and miracles? But my heart said, ask, keep asking. So I'd let myself cry. I'd cry in yoga. I'd, you know, scream in my car. I'd do whatever I could to get it out of my body, to open space for possibilities. And I would pray for magic and miracles. And it was the craziest thing. One by one, they started showing up. Against all odds, we found out that my husband's brother, who lives in San Francisco, who does medical PR, had recently written an article on multiple myeloma. I mean, we'd never even heard of it.
Uh-huh.
He had written an article from his research. He knew about the foremost specialist who had only worked on this disease for 30 years, who was in LA. We were going to LA for my birthday. We just so happened to get an appointment with the specialist. They made space for us at 6:30 in the morning. Like everything lined up. My husband's doctor and friend in LA was friends with the specialist. The specialist's office was right near where we're staying, which is a miracle when you consider how spread out LA is. Everything lined up. We meet this doctor, and the first thing he says to me, well, I'm looking at your numbers here, and this is myeloma light. This is chemo. Let's do some more tests. I don't trust that guy's tests. Let's do some more tests. Let's do an MRI. He did all that. He said, no chemo, no bone damage, no transplant. I just need to see you like every 12 weeks just to do a checkup.
Yeah.
But you can go forward in your life as if you don't even have this disease. Now, that was Muck To Magic. Now,
well, yeah, and it leaves a completely different story loose in your head, that if you had stayed with the old story, it's amazing how people get a diagnosis and you can't unhear it. And, you know, it just throws you toward the dark side. So just, and not an illusion, but you really got clearly that there was another story that could be told. And by telling that different story with evidence, you know, it was the,
right. And what we did, one of the things I noticed was with every little quote coincidence or synchronicity, it was like we celebrated it. You know, we didn't say, oh yeah, well, blah, blah, blah. We probably can't get into that guy. It'll
right,
take
exactly.
We just said, wow, isn't that miraculous that Johnny knew this doctor? What are the chances? And he'd written a newsletter for Stanford. What are the chances? Yeah. It was like every little thing. Wow. And the doctor's in West Hollywood. And this is the first time we've ever stayed in West Hollywood. And we just kept being in awe and wonder of the littlest, most seemingly insignificant coincidence. Yes. And I believe that gathered up this positive momentum, which pulled in, like we're all magnets, you know, and our energy attracts more. And where they always say, you know, energy flows where attention goes. And I always say, find what's right when things go wrong. So we kept, you know, we didn't ignore the fact that there was an issue here, but we did keep paying attention to the things that were going right. And
well, I know it's certainly not easy when we've been thrown into this whole virus thing, but that is one of the most essential, powerful, positive steps that we can take.
I believe that,
really,
yes.
You know, don't overdwell on the news and look for the dandelion flower coming up through the crack in the sidewalk and celebrate that. Yeah. Because what you focus on is what expands. And so many people think that's woo-woo, and they're really limited to, you know, the third dimension reality of only 5 sentences when yes. So much else is going on right now. And so it is the job of thought leaders like you and I and teachers. It's like we aren't gurus. We're just out there daring to not wallow in the muck, but to engage with the muck and let it teach us how to move forward with this commitment of knowing that we're going to, you know, our wings are going to expand.
Well, and it's funny what you said about woo-woo, because my new saying is I embrace the woo because it's better than the woe. I mean, there's so much woe right now that I'm just on a mission to look for the magic, you know?
Say that again.
I said, with all the woe, I'm here to embrace the woo-woo, because I just feel that it's not frivolous. I feel that it is essential, like you said.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you're driving down the highway and there's an accident over there. If you keep looking at the accident, the next thing you know, you're going to go into it and create another accident. But if you just stay where you are and just look right ahead of you,
yes,
you're fine. And I feel like, yes, we need to be aware of what's happening. We need to be careful. We need to know some of the news, but I think it's really important to find a balance to it, because so much of our personal reality is what we create through our thoughts, that I think we have to be as careful about that as, you know, the supplements that we take and other things that we feed ourselves.
Well, I think that's the best final words of wisdom that you could possibly leave us with, as we're all maneuvering a really challenging time. And I think the other thing I want to make sure that you share is how can people find you and where can people get a hold of your book?
Okay, thank you. All right, so my book, From Muck to Magic, the best way to get it is to go to my website, because I got a magical publisher, but the mucked up part is she wasn't on Amazon. So now she's finally getting the books onto Amazon, but it hasn't quite happened yet. So if you go to my website, which of course I had to spell my name differently. It's Wendi Knox, but I spell it WENDIKNOX. So go to Wendi Knox, WENDIKNOX.com, and you'll see some of my paintings. I have a blog that's very inspirational, and you'll also be able to order the book really easily. And when you go to the site, the book, there's also greeting cards with my artwork on it, and a journal. So
phenomenal.
I hate to be the goddess of shameless self-promotion, but I think it is a really nurturing gift that you can give yourself. People have said that it's balm for the soul, and I've had people tell me that they read the book every night or every morning, almost as a meditation, to remind themselves that in the muck there's magic.
Yes. And, you know, to me, words and art carry so much energy. And that's another reason why I was just so drawn to your work, and how our, you know, we can think from a competitive, the old paradigm. You think, oh, that person's doing exactly what I'm doing, or, you know, it's similar, and see that as a competition. I see that as group mind. It's just the, you know, we're connecting with the expansiveness, and to see someone else parallel on the journey, to me, it just expands the possibilities. So I'm looking forward to us playing much more together, and I'm so grateful for the time that you took today.
Oh, thank you. Oh, can I just end on one little thought?
Sure.
One of the things I really believe is important is, when you're going through hard, challenging times, is to ask yourself what magic is growing in this muck. Because, you know, I'd wanted to do a book for a really long time, and I didn't get my first book published till I was 65, and I had my first solo art show at 65. So the fact that I'm sitting here with this book talking to you is proof that, just like the Dragonflies taught me and teach all of us, it's never too late to soar. So if you're watching this and you have a dream in your heart and your mind is saying it's too late, you're unrealistic, blah, 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 I say, stay right where you are, look in your heart. If you get a yes, keep going, because it's not about logic. It's about your passion, your desire, your guidance, and listening to your heart, because it really is never too late.
No, there's one author that I've always loved, Richard Bach, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, but my favorite book of his is Illusions.
Me too. I love that book.
It's really The Reluctant Messiah. And one of the quotes from there is, it's probably paraphrasing it because it's been a while since I've read it, but he said, if you think your mission in life is complete, if you're still breathing, it's not.
Yeah.
So I think you and I are both here to defy age. It's more about the message. And so we'll play more together.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I love this conversation.
Thank you, Wendi. Talk to you soon.